Pick up a can of corned beef. Read the label. Now, look inside. There is beef. There is salt. There is absolutely no corn anywhere. Not a single kernel, not a trace. The name makes no sense. And yet, millions of people eat this every single day without ever stopping to ask why it is called what it is called. Every food historian will tell you the same answer. It comes from Old English. It refers to salt grains. The word corn used to mean something different. And that answer is correct. But it is only half the story, because the real question is not why the word survived. The real question is why the food survived, and who it saved when it did. Welcome to Latent Histories. Today we're uncovering the word, the history, and the surprising truth about how a humble tin of salted beef became a global food and what it cost the people who made it famous. To understand why it is called corned beef, we first have to understand what the world looked like before refrigerators existed. Before the 1800s, keeping meat from rotting was one of the most urgent problems in daily life. No cold storage, no preservatives. Without a solution, meat spoiled within days. The solution was salt, specifically large, coarse crystals of salt, the kind that looked almost like rough little pebbles, and in Old English the word for any small hard grain or particle was corn. Not the yellow vegetable, just a grain, any grain. So when beef was packed and preserved using those large salt crystals, it was packed in corns of salt. That is all the name means. The corn in corned beef was never food. It was a description of the tool that kept the food alive. The salting process was not simply rubbing meat with a pinch of seasoning. Beef was packed tightly into barrels with layers of coarse salt crystals piled around every surface. Salt draws moisture out of the meat through osmosis. And without moisture, bacteria cannot survive. This made corned beef enormously valuable, not as everyday food, but as portable, stable, long-lasting protein. By the 1600s, Ireland had become the world's leading exporter of corned beef. The Irish climate was ideal for cattle. The salt was cheap. The product was in demand everywhere. But here's the part of that story nobody mentions. Who was actually eating all of this Irish corned beef? Not the Irish? The high-quality salted beef was produced almost entirely for export. It went to wealthy English tables, to naval vessels, to colonial outposts. The Irish who raised the cattle mostly ate pork and vegetables. Corned beef was something they made for other people. So how did corned beef become the dish we now call Irish American? That answer starts on a boat crossing the Atlantic. In the 1840s, the Irish famine drove over 1 million immigrants to the United States. They arrived in cities like New York, and for the first time, many of them could actually afford beef. Their neighbors in those tenement buildings were Jewish immigrants, whose butchers were already selling a salted brined beef brisket that tasted remarkably similar to the corned beef back home. The Irish bought it. They cooked it with cabbage, the cheapest vegetable available. And a tradition was invented on the spot. Corned beef and cabbage became the symbol of Irish identity in America, a dish that was never actually Irish, made by people who could never afford it in Ireland, adopted from Jewish neighbors in New York. Before we finish, here is one last surprising detail. At some point in the 1800s, the English language quietly shifted. The word corn stopped meaning any grain. In America especially, it came to mean one specific thing, the yellow vegetable. The old meaning simply faded away, but the name corned beef had already been in use for 2 centuries. Changing the name would have meant changing history. So, the old word stayed, trapped inside a food label, outliving the meaning that created it by over 200 years. So the next time you open a can of corned beef, or see it on a diner menu, you'll know it is carrying 3 histories at once. A word from Old English that meant salt, a food made by a people who couldn't afford to eat it, and a dish invented in a New York tenement building by immigrants making the best of what they had. The corn changed its meaning, the beef stayed the same, and the name became a bridge between a world that no longer exists and a dinner plate that still does. If you learned something that surprised you today, hit the like button. It genuinely helps. And subscribe to Latent Histories for more stories about the everyday objects you've never stopped to question. Thanks for watching.